This is lesson 16, and it's about educating the less fortunate. One of the points that I made in the last lesson was that most countries around the world, particularly the high-performing countries, do a much better job of educating their socioeconomically deprived students. And it's a conclusion that you have to draw from the last lesson, is that if we want to raise our scores, average scores, by reading, math, and science, that we are going to have to do a better job of educating our poor students. So this is what this lesson is about. The last lesson closed with this statement. Basically, if you can make the far left end 8% better for the United States, would elevate them up to a world-class level. This doesn't sound like a lot, but it is, and the question is, can we do it? Here's kind of an important statement that I've made that gives my philosophy about education. I am not sure we can raise the scores of our most disadvantaged students to a level equal to the outstanding countries, but I am sure that we can do much, much better with these children. We can do so well that it will change our society for the better. More importantly, the lives of these citizens. Fewer incarcerations, less dependent upon government programs, and a swelling sense of pride, not just for them, but for the entire nation. An 8% improvement doesn't sound like much, but in reality it is a lot. If you have viewed some of the prior lessons, you would learn that U.S. students haven't improved for 47 years in reading and math. That is determined by the U.S. Department of Education's periodic assessment exam. Our PISA scores, our international assessment scores, have flatlined it at a less than stellar level. Our high school competence levels have gotten worse. That is, we see worse scores on reading, math, and science. To produce improved students, we must change our system. We must look to how top-tiered countries educate their poor. We'll see two clips by Jeffrey Canada. The first talks about the problem we have across America that goes beyond black and browns. Nowhere in these lessons have we said anything about race, and there's a reason for that. It is not confined to blacks and browns. It is a socioeconomic problem. The last clip talks about how the world is changing and whites will be in a minority. We must train the blacks and browns to lead this country.
Too often people have assumed that this crisis really is about poor black and brown children in America. And they could not be more wrong. This crisis is impacting our entire country. People are beginning to write about the vast gap between those who have money and can spend the time and resources to educate their children, which is the top 5% in this nation, and what's happening to all the other children in America. For folk who think this is about African Americans and Latinos, I have some real news for you. This is not going good for the average middle-class child in this country. We have college graduation rates that are shocking in the middle class. Less than 30% of the kids are completing college by the time they're 26. And there are no jobs that are going to be available if you don't have a quality education in this country. We have watched our country squander its resources and somehow decide that we can't afford to provide quality education for our children. This is a huge mistake in America. And I'm going to tell you something. If there is something worth fighting for, it is for this next generation. They are facing a situation which is unparalleled in this country. We haven't had a situation like this where an entire generation, right now, there is no plan for what we're going to do for that generation. And some of you may be thinking, well, Jeff, you're making this thing sound like it's so gloomy and dreadful. There's a plan out there to save our kids, millions of kids. But you probably thought, like I did, that there was a plan, but it was above my pay grade, right? That the people who run America, that they had this whole thing figured out. But over the last 5 or 6 years with Marion, I've met a few presidents, a few secretaries of education, some secretaries of labor, directors of domestic policy. There is no plan. You know what happens when they see me? They say, Jeff, can I ask you a question? What do you think we ought to do? So you guys don't know? Y'all are sitting out here running the country, you don't know. They do not know. This is education in our country is the social service equivalent of Katrina. You remember those people standing on the rooftops with the signs, right? Come save us. Nobody's coming. And if we don't save our own children, they will not be saved.
The only answer is education. It's the only answer. There is not another answer. There is not another answer. So if we're going to save this country, and you know what, this used to be a small problem, right? People used to think, oh, it's a black-brown problem. There's two problems with that kind of thinking. Number one, it's false. When you begin to see how big this issue is and how few of our young people are actually prepared to enter the labor market and make anything like a decent wage. This is a much bigger problem than just the black and brown kids in this country. That's the first thing. Second thing, if you look at the demographic shifts in this country and the birth rates, you're going to see 25 years from now, most of the folk in this country are going to be black and brown. If we don't figure out how we solve this, how are we going to stay a great country? It just simply, it doesn't add up. And so, as far as I'm concerned, this is the most important piece of business we have in America. Everybody's talking about income inequality. We ought to talk about it. How are you going to solve it? Educate these folk who haven't received a decent education. Now,
Top performing countries have made explicit decisions to create systems which subjects all students to the standards formerly reserved only for their elites. When we look at the graph of the U.S. versus Hong Kong in Lesson 15, it is clear from the performance data that they focused on educating their disadvantaged students. Every country has students with poor socioeconomic standards. They are not naturally more intelligent than our poor students. They have learned from other countries that they can be successfully educating these poor children, but it takes extra resources and time. As the above sentence statement says, they hold these students to the same standard as their best students. These countries have discovered they cannot have a high standing in the world's ranking without educating these folks. It is not their motivation, but it is a byproduct of desire to leave no child behind. The question on the table is this: can poor children across America rise to meet the level expected from our best students? My reply is yes, they can, but it'll not be easy. It will cost money and take time, both time per student, in other words, more hours per day, perhaps more days per week, or even days per year, and elapsed time to change the values of these children and their parents. Here is a concluding video. This is Dan Cardinelli, president of Communities in Schools, the largest dropout prevention program in America. He explains the problem of non-cognitive skills, what I call character and grit in other lessons, and how deficiencies in these skills can lead children to drop out of school. He has a fix. This is an 11-minute video, and the lesson will conclude at the end of the video.
Today I'm going to talk about public education, and what I have to say may be shocking. It certainly is still shocking to me. You need to know I say this as a third-generation American who owes my piece of the American dream to a public education system that helped my family move up the economic ladder from really humble beginnings. Today I have the honor of leading a national nonprofit that works with public educators across the country, operating dropout prevention and graduation promotion programs in partnership with teachers and principals and parents in 2,400 public schools. So it pains me as a deep believer and unabashed supporter of public education to say that today's public schools simply aren't designed for the majority of students in the classroom. Bit by bit, over the years, the socioeconomic makeup of our student population has shifted dramatically, while the way schools operate, the way they're designed, has barely budged. If you want to see how the face of public education has changed, really there's just one number you need to know: 51%. 51% of students in the classroom today are on free and reduced price lunch. In 1989, that number was less than 32%. Now, the National School Lunch Program is generally the way we determine low income rates for public schools. So what this number tells us, this 51%, is that the majority of kids in school are functionally poor. And there's a brutal fact: schools were never designed to manage that magnitude of poverty in the classroom. In fact, schools were designed as we as a nation transitioned from an agrarian-based economy to an industrial-based economy, where bustling factories could pay middle-class wages for semi-skilled labor, enabling one parent to focus on breadwinning and the other on child development. The division of labor really was what characterized the industrial age, and that absolutely translated into how we designed public schools. Over here, you had families with the time and the resources to focus on the child development side of the equation. And over here, you had schools with expert teachers and adults focused on the academic side of the equation. And this part, the school part, it worked precisely because this part, the family part, was focused on building grit and resilience and persistence and self-regulation. All these critically important skills we know today as non-cognitive skills or social-emotional learning. 120 years later, this part, the school part, it's still slugging away at the academic side of the equation. But there's been a tremendous shift in the family. The division of labor within the family in a post-industrial economy means that both parents have to work. And if you're in a single family, time and resources are in rather short supply. Nearly 25 million children in America live in single-parent families, meaning the economic resources and that precious family time are really very scarce. So we should not be surprised that millions upon millions of young people every day come to school with underdeveloped non-cognitive skills. Quite frankly, that just doesn't work. Dropping off a poor kid at a traditionally designed public school and expecting her to get a complete education is a little bit like dropping off at a department store and expecting her to get a week's worth of groceries. Both places really have great stuff. They just don't meet the basic needs of our child in order for her to be successful. Now, school educators, they often say, hey, we are not in the child development business. But given the shift in the socioeconomic makeup of our student body, we as a nation have to ask, well, then exactly whose business is it? You see, none of us are born with these non-cognitive skills. We learn them over the course of our life through really critical, important developmental experiences and examples, and most importantly, through a set of developmental relationships with caring adults who coach us and mentor us, who will chastise us, and they will believe in us. Those of us who grew up in a middle-class background, we're lucky. We probably were completely unaware of the range of developmental experiences and adults that made up our life. That coach at gymnastics or soccer practice who helped us bust through when we fell down or lost a game, building grit and resilience. That camp counselor who helped us for the first time negotiate independence from our family and build a whole new set of relationships with peers. That back-breaking job bussing tables at the corner restaurant. You had a boss who was probably watching if you were showing up on time or if you were slacking off. Here's the thing, and really here's the tragedy. poor kids in America have fundamentally fewer access to these critically important developmental experiences and caring adults who are so essential to building these non-cognitive skills. If you're a single dad working 2 jobs, you don't have time to drop off Dan at soccer practice. You don't have extra resources for him to be able to go to summer camp. And Dan can't take that summer after school job because he's got to come home after school to take care of his younger siblings while you work your second shift. So this brings me back to the critical number, 51%. 51% of school-age children are functionally poor. When the majority of kids in the classroom lack the critical non-academic experience and non-cognitive skills necessary for them to be successful in school, schools are overwhelmed. Regardless of how extraordinary the teacher is, how innovative you've been in bringing in technology, schools can't keep all students on track when so many are in need of remediation for their non-cognitive skills. So we shouldn't be surprised that every year we lose 1 million young people who drop out of school. They are disproportionate kids who come from low-income families. So that means they're going to perpetuate a cycle of poverty in their life. A cycle of poverty which means they'll be disproportionately vulnerable to homelessness and hunger, to being unemployed or underemployed, and a much higher probability of being incarcerated. Costs that these kids should not have to bear, and we as a society can no longer afford. So I've painted a pretty grim picture, and I hope shocking. But I'm here today to talk about how we can change the picture of education by changing our assumptions about what public schools can and should do. So let's go back to our metaphor of dropping off a kid and expecting to get a week's worth of groceries. Now, work with me here. Imagine that this school or network of schools, or this network of department stores has been redesigned. We've gone out and we found a whole group of farmers to come in and share their wares. And we set up a farmer's market. Over here you've got great fresh milk and cheese and yogurt, wonderful, glorious, fresh produce, free-range beef in the back, and these wonderful, wonderful breads and baked goods. All these resources were actually in the community, but they weren't connected to our shopper, so she rarely had access to them. Now imagine we have actually a nutritionist on staff who helps with menu planning. There's actually food stations around the store that help you actually see how to make these nutritious meals. But most importantly, there is a personal shopper, a highly trained professional shopper every day, making sure the clients who come through the door get the right mix of products and services. What I've just described in a very simple way is a school reform strategy that goes by a number of different names: integrated student supports, community schools, wraparound services. In this model, schools serve as a central distribution point for a whole range of community resources, and it's all orchestrated by a caring adult who's integrated into the very design of how the school operates, ensuring non-academic needs are being met. At communities and schools, we call this person a site coordinator. He's this wonderful mix of love and highly trained professionalism, and he builds a caring relationship with kids, trust, and with teachers and principals and community resources. He then builds an individual school development plan for the student, and then reaches out into the community, finding existing community resources, and connects them to the kid. What kinds of resources are we talking about? Mentoring and tutoring, after-school programming, food banks, college access programs, job shadowing, community service opportunities. The fact is, in America, there are incredible resources throughout communities, but they're just disconnected from the people that need them in the places that they need them. Primarily because our schools are set up as academic silos. And quite frankly, our social service sector is a maze of bureaucracy and paperwork and organizational complexity. The goal of this model, this integrated student service model, is to break down the silos and simplify the maze, unifying a set of resources into the building to make school a holistic development center where academic and non-academic needs are being met. I liken this a little bit to penicillin because of this. Last year, Child Trends issued a wonderful report and said there is an incredible set of strategies going out there, and we want to know more about it. And so they said, community school, tell us a little bit about the work you do. How much does it cost to actually do this? They said, actually, it's about $160 per student per year to redesign schools, to integrate these resources. And your graduation rate among your eligible seniors, how many is that? 91% of CIS's eligible seniors graduate from high school. So they began to look at other programs. We're not the only ones out there. There are lots. And they issued a report last year after analyzing mountains of data from across the United States. And they said, you know, this strategy is capable of lowering dropout rates and improving graduation rates. It does it in elementary, middle, and high schools, in urban, rural, and suburban environments. But most importantly, it is effective with low-income children who come to school with underdeveloped non-cognitive skills. This integrated student service strategy can unify academic and non-academic service. So what stands before us is a challenge to redesign public education. I've talked a lot about theory and numbers. I'd love to end with a story.